Hi, I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World, and this is the new pattern in the Funny Faces Quilt Block of the Month Club. When I say new pattern, it is February 15th, 2021. So this pattern is going to be exclusive to the Funny Faces Quilt Block of the Month Club until March 15th, 2021, when it will be replaced with a new pattern in the club, and then this pattern will be available in the shop at Shiny Happy World sometime probably the first week in April. So this month's pattern is a pair of lovebirds. And before I get into the details of exactly how to do this particular block, I'm just going to give you a really quick overview of my method of quilt as you go, because it's a little bit different than anybody else's method that I know of. So the first thing that you do is cut your background square and your batting, and you're going to want to use cotton batting for it, and you quilt the background square to the batting. Don't worry about the applique. At this point, you're just going to quilt that background. And if I flip it over, well, this pattern has a lot going on, but you can see that these quilting lines run beneath the birds. So if you do that applique or that quilting first, first of all, then you don't have to quilt around the applique shapes, and it just lets you kind of doodle it and freeform it and have a little fun with it. I do all of my quilting designs without any marking, and there are a couple of tutorials at Shiny Happy World that will show you some different kind of loose doodly patterns that you can use. One that's all straight lines and one that is all wavy lines. So after you get the background block quilted to the batting, just the batting, no backing, then you layer on your appliques, fuse those in place. I use fusible adhesive, and then do all of your outline stitching also through just the background and the batting. So you've done all of that tight turns and all these little points that you're having to pivot around. Do all of that while you've got just the small block, not before you have the whole big block, the whole big quilt sewn together. Then you trim your block down to whatever size the pattern calls for. In mine, you always trim to 10.5 inches. And sew all the blocks together. Press those seams open on the back. If you use cotton batting, you can press it from the cotton side and from the batting side, and it will not melt the batting. And also cotton batting is thin and really doesn't give you a lot of bulk at those seams. So sew all your blocks together, press those seams open, and then I add my backing, and then do one final round of quilting, just stitching in the ditch on those seam lines that are now going to be 10 inches apart. So that means that the only part of the quilting that you're doing with the entire quilt in the machine is the very last round when you're attaching that backing, and it's all straight line stitching. Very, very easy. There's nothing to steer through the machine. There's not a big massive quilt that you're trying to work with. And I can do a nap size quilt, which is my favorite size for on the couch, in about a half an hour. That gives you an idea of how much quilting is involved at that part of the process. Then you bind it just like a regular quilt and you are done. So that is kind of a general overview of my method of quilt as you go. Now I'm going to show you how to make this particular pair of lovebirds. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to do is print your pattern, and this pattern comes on 2 different pages because there's 2 birds and I couldn't get them all to fit on a single page. So what I did is I separated out the shorter of the 2 birds and all of the pieces for the short bird and all of the pieces for the tall bird. And I call them short and tall instead of left and right because the pattern has already been reversed, and it gets really confusing to have it say the left one. It makes things easier to just say short and tall. So all of the pieces are labeled so you'll know which ones go with which when you're trying to put it together. So you can either print it out on regular paper and then trace it onto your fusible adhesive, or you can print it directly on the fusible adhesive. This is the brand that I like. There are lots of other different brands that people love, but people always ask me what I like. I use the Heat and Bond, and the lightweight is the one that I use for all of my samples that I make. That's the one in the purple packaging. But that is one that is a strong enough adhesive. It's still flexible and soft to make a cuddly quilt, but it is strong enough that it can go through the washer and dryer without any headaches and without it fraying and coming loose. So get all of the pieces printed out or traced onto your fusible adhesive, and then you're going to roughly cut them out and fuse them to the back of your fabric. Now, when I say roughly cut them out, I mean cut out around the shapes. For now, you're just paying attention to the solid lines. Ignore the dotted lines for now, but leave a little bit of space all around the edges. So you can see there's a little bit of white paper all the way around. Do that and then follow the package directions for whichever brand you're using and fuse all of the pieces to the back of the fabric. So on this one, there are a solid black eye for each bird. There's also a white, larger patch because the lovebirds have a really distinctive white circle around their eyes. There's the head, which is really just kind of the cap at the top of their head. And then there is a neck piece and then a body piece, and there's one for each of them. And then there is a wing for each of them and a beak, 2 beak pieces for each of them. There's the top beak and the bottom beak piece for each bird. So get those all fused down, and then we will move on to cutting them out. Okay, the next step is to do a clean cut. So in the last video, we talked about how you do a rough cut where you leave a little bit of extra. Now we're going to do the clean cut, and I'll talk about why. So if you cut this out, a nice clean cut, the first cut, and then fused it to the fabric, now I'd be trying to cut and I'd be trying to get exactly on that line. And if I missed it by even a thread in some places, that thread is going to fray because it's not going to have any of the fusible adhesive on it. So right now, the way I've done it, my fusible adhesive goes past the cutting line. That's the solid line. Remember, we're ignoring all the dotted lines right now. So since the adhesive goes past that, that means when I now cut through the part that's already fused down, that adhesive goes absolutely all the way to the edge of that cut piece, and there's not even a thread left unglued. So next up, we are going to talk about all of these dotted lines and how to transfer them and what they're good for. All right, so I've got all of my pieces clean cut, and there are a lot of pieces on this because there are 2 birds and each bird is multiple pieces. So we've got a lot going on here. We've got all of these dotted lines going through and around the edges of a lot of these pieces. So these lines are going to help you assemble it, put it all together, this jigsaw puzzle, because when you flip that over, that just kind of looks like, what the heck is that supposed to be? So all of these lines are going to help us put it all together. So I transfer these lines by holding the piece up, fabric side facing me, in a window, and the light shining through the window lets you see those lines through, and you can transfer those markings then to the front side of your fabric. Since it's going on the front side of the fabric, you need to be thoughtful about what you're using to transfer that marking. And I use 3 basic tools. So the first one that I use is just a regular fine tip Sharpie, and I use that to transfer anything. So on these little eye patches, I'm going to put a simple black applique shape over it. So I mark that position with a black fine tip pen because that dark line, I don't need to worry about it showing through the black fabric. But I would not mark other pieces with a black line because that might show through any of the lighter fabrics, like a lighter yellow. Also, on a different piece that would have maybe a line, a smile, or something like that, I would do this because I'm going to stitch right over that line. But there are no markings like that on this piece. So mark the little pupils with that black pen. After that, I've got 2 tools that I use. One is just a plain white chalk, and this is my favorite to use. If the fabric is too light for that chalk to show up, then I will use just a regular pencil. And this is just a plain, nothing fancy, Ticonderoga pencil, number 2 pencil. One thing, both of these can be erased, but you do not want to use the eraser that comes with the pencil. On the Ticonderoga, it's a black eraser. Other pencils might have a red eraser, but those can leave a smudge on the fabric. So when you're erasing your lines, I just use a inexpensive white artist eraser. It's a plastic eraser. You can get these at any art supply store or craft store, and they will erase both the chalk lines and the pencil lines without leaving a smudge. So for all of the rest of my markings, I want to use something that is erasable. Don't use a friction pen because you're going to iron this down and the friction pen will erase your markings. So just keep that in mind. So transfer all of these dotted lines to the front of your fabric. You can't see them too clearly on that yellow. I think it'll show up on camera, but you can see it pretty clearly on this orange, or a little bit on this pink. This one is all fairly light colors, but I managed to do everything with that white chalk line. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to use those lines to put it all together. Okay, so I'm getting ready to put this block together, and I'm going to say right now that this is one of the more complicated blocks that I've designed. But the bird itself is complicated with a lot of pieces, and then there are 2 of them, so that makes it extra complicated. So the first thing I did was separate all the tall bird pieces on the left where the tall bird is going to go, and all the short bird pieces I've got in a pile here on the right where the short bird is going to go. So we're going to start with this biggest body piece, and they are marked on them, tall body, short body. If the pieces are too small, I've got the description of what it is to the side of it a little bit, but I still put a T or an S in the piece so that you'll be able to see it even after you cut them all out. So we have got first that tall body piece, and I just set that up so that the straight edge is lined up with the straight edge of the fabric. So now we're going to do the same thing with the short body piece. Now the short body piece overlaps the tall body piece by just a little bit, and you can see on the tall body piece there's a little curve here. That's showing where the breast of the shorter body overlaps it. I'm not sure that you can see it on the video because it is a light color there. So I'm going to set that up so that it overlaps, and once it covers that marking that I made, I know I've got that in the right place. So that kind of sets up your alignment. You've got both pieces, their straight edges are lined up with the bottom raw edge of the block, and then the shorter one is overlapping the tall one just a little bit. So now we're going to start doing the neck pieces. So the short neck peeled off the back, and I've got lines on the green and lines on the yellow, and I've got this so that you can see where it overlaps. So once I've covered up the lines on the green, I know I've got this overlapped the right amount. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the neck piece on the tall body. So that one also, I'm just covering up the lines that I've drawn on the green piece. And the lines on the yellow piece just show you that there's another piece underneath it. All right, now I'm going to put the wings in. So the short wing goes again with the flat edge, goes up against the flat edge of your block. And once I've overlapped the markings on the lighter green, I've got that in the right place. I'm going to do the same thing on the tall body with its wing. And the tall one's wing overlaps the green of the body and also the yellow of the neck. And I've got lines on both of those. So once I cover those lines, I'm good. All right, now I'm going to start doing some beak. And the beaks, I think, are the hardest part. They are 2 pieces for each bird's beak. So on the shorter bird, the beak, I'm going to flip it over so you can see it better. There is overlap at the top and at the bottom, not on this edge. That is the edge that is this bottom edge of the beak. It's the only part that doesn't get overlapped by anything. So I'm going to tuck this so that it goes underneath this yellow. And once I've covered up the line on the pink, I am good. And it should come pretty close to touching that, touching the neck of this guy. So now we're going to put the tall beak on, and the tall one has a very helpful mark. There's on the front of the tall body's neck piece, there's a little curve showing you where this beak overlaps it. So this beak overlaps into that curve marked there and overlaps the lower beak, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. So now it's tucked underneath this neck piece. So we've got him in the right place. And now I'm just going to go ahead and finish the top of the short bird. So his head, you can see there's a line. It's on the beak and it's on the yellow, and that's going to help me position the top of his head. And again, once I get those lines below covered up, I know I've got it in the right place. Now, let me get the eye on there. So I've got a marking that shows where the eye goes. They have a really distinctive white circle behind their eye. And then they have a black pupil inside that white patch. All right, so that bird is all put together. Now we've got to do this taller bird. So his beak has also has overlap at where the top beak overlaps it and overlap where the neck feathers are going to overlap him. So this is the part, this little point here is the part that is left uncovered. So that's the way that I'm going to hold it. And I'm going to tuck this underneath the yellow neck feathers right until it covers the line that I transferred onto that pink beak. And then I've got the top beak. Now, here you've got a couple of choices. So on the head of the short bird, there's a little marking showing you where the beak overlaps that. You can overlap it or underlap it. On my original drawing, it actually went under, whoops, I just missed that around. It actually went under the bird's head. But as I was putting it together, I liked it better for it to sit over that head because I like the look of those hooked beaks, and it could go either way. So I liked it that way, and that's the way I'm going to leave it. But you could tuck it underneath if you want to, if you're trying to match the original drawing. And I've done sample blocks both ways. In the final video, I'll show you both options. So on this one, I get that overlapped, and now all of those pieces, the major pieces, are in there. And now we just have the eye patch and the pupil, which is easy. So we've got a little eye patch going there, and oops, black part of his eye. And there we go. So I'm going to take that to my ironing board. I'm going to fuse that all in place, and then I'm going to take it to my sewing machine, and I'm going to do all of the outlining of all of these pieces, and then I will bring it back here and walk you through that outlining and show you some of the samples in other colors that I did, and also showing you that beak tip under or over. All right, here we are with the finished block. And normally at this point in the process, I kind of walk you through the path that I took on how to outline it with as little stopping and starting as possible. But honestly, this one has got so many pieces and it's so complicated, I feel like that would just be, it's a little much to do to follow and duplicate on your own. So instead, I'm going to talk about just kind of the general principles, the general rules that I follow when I'm outlining any of these blocks. And I'll talk a little bit about minimizing the number of times you have to stop and start. So the main thing is that I start at the top. So start with a piece that has no other pieces overlapping it. So on these, that would be the pupils of the eyes. And for the black pieces, I just outline them once because you can't see the stitching really. It's just there to hold it in place so it can go through the laundry. Everywhere else, I've gone over it 3 times, just gone around each shape 3 times, just using regular thread. I like the kind of sketchy sketchbook look that gives to it. If you don't want that look, but you want the thicker line, you can use thicker thread. You can also use decorative stitching. You can use satin stitching. You've got all kinds of different options, but if you're gonna put it through the washer and dryer, you do need to do stitching to secure it. So on these, I started with the pupils, and then I went 3 times around each of those white eye patches. They don't have anything else underneath them or overlapping them anyway. So just do those, they're little islands, and you're done. Next up, I wanted to start with the tops of the heads, but I'm going to start with this head first because this head has this beak overlapping it. So I would start, in this case then, I would start to think about how I'm going to do the rest of the project. But I will go around this 3 times, once, twice, 3 times. And now that I've gone around the top of the head, I can come down and do, for example, the top of this beak or the bottom of this beak. But I think on this one, I just did the top of the beak and then tie it off. Then once I've done the top of the beak here, I can do this head piece. And this, for something like this, I would go around once and then back the second way and then the third trip. So going back and forth instead of just in a continuous circle. So then you can do the same thing with the neck pieces. Go around the neck once, twice, 3 times. Once you've done the top of the head and the neck, you can do the beak pieces. Once you've done the top of the head and the wing on this one, because this neck piece tucks under the wing, so I would do the wing first and then do this neck piece. And then you can do the bodies, and then you can do this wing. So if you just think of it as starting at the top and working your way down and always trying to do any piece that overlaps another piece, do the top piece first and then go in and pick up the piece below that, and then the piece below that, and the piece below that. And that will always give you some lines to work from and lines to connect to. Because what I want is my black outlining to look like the drawing. So I want those lines to connect, at least come very close to connect. So if I do this, I'm going to zoom this in right here. So if I do the head piece first and then this beak piece that is tucked underneath it, I can make this line that's going the top curve of the beak, I can make it connect to this line of the head. So if you start at the top and work your way down, you always have lines to connect to. So that is a general approach to outlining that you can use for any block, any applique pattern. But now I want to show you a couple of different color schemes that you can do. So on this one, I used the background block is from the Warm Neutrals Batik bundle. And the fabrics for the bird are from the Rainbow Brights bundle with a little bit of extra from the Little Stripes bundle. Lovebirds come in all kinds of different colors. There are blue lovebirds and green lovebirds, but I did all 3 of my sample blocks with the same basics color scheme, the kind of rainbow lovebirds that shade from pink on their beaks to orangey red at the top, and then through orange, and then through yellow, and then down into greenish bodies, and then they have darker green wings. So I duplicated that with some different fabrics for the other blocks. So this version of the block, this uses one of the Rainbow Bright Batiks for the background. And then for the bodies of the birds, I used the Dots fabric bundle and the Gingham Play fabric bundle, which work really well together. And then I did one more version that I think is my favorite. And this uses the Muted Rainbow solids for the background block and the Batik Rainbow for the birds. And all of these, I just used a little white on white scrap that I had for the eyes. So this one, I like the kind of painty effect that the Batik fabric gives. But you can do a Google search for Lovebirds and you will see all kinds of different color schemes that you can use. I just wanted to show you how even within the same basic color scheme, you could get very different looks to your birds. So that is the Lovebirds pattern. Have fun with that. And I will be back next month with a brand new pattern in the Funny Faces Club. I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World. I'll see you next time.